Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Watch More Movies. I am your host, Ricky, and today we are talking about the biggest new release that's taken over the world, basically, and it'll probably be the biggest of the year, if not one of. It is Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. Christopher Nolan has been one of the biggest directors in Hollywood for the better part of 20 years now, making his big entrance with Memento and Insomnia as far as the Hollywood studio system goes, then directing arguably the most successful trilogy in blockbuster movies, the Dark Knight trilogy, and continuing to push the envelope with grand scale filmmaking and being original in his storytelling without overly relying on franchises or properties, and even sequels to his own films. I think if you ask someone their favorite 10 films of the 21st century, there's a good chance that he has one on there, and for good reason. He has this utter passion for spectacle and experience that even watching certain films at home can give you that experience. But nothing beats seeing his films for the first time in a theater, which he makes a point to go out of his way and make sure that you do see it in theaters. I remember seeing The Dark Knight Rises, Inception, Interstellar, all in the theater multiple times, and nearly all of his films in theaters post Insomnia. Even Tenet, with the release falling victim to COVID and came out in limited release at the time, but luckily I got to see it for the first time at Music Box here in Chicago on film. Now, The Odyssey has become an entire conversation topic on its own without talking on the merits of the film itself. Luckily, past the release of it, it's kind of faded away. I don't want to get too deep into it. I think a lot of that stuff is ridiculous, and if you know me, you know my opinion on that. People's bigotry is just very fragile for some reason. But today, on this episode, instead of recommending swords and sandal epics, doing a full Christopher Nolan director dive, I want to rank all of his films instead, while also reviewing the Odyssey when we get to that in the ranking. And spoiler alert, it's going to be very high up there. Let's get started on ranking these and giving my thoughts on each one. I'm going to start at number 13, and that is his feature debut, Following. We follow our lead character, unnamed, who has a knack or maybe even light fetish for following people around at random. There isn't anything specific or particular about who he chooses, nor does he do anything to them or get too personal. He just gets curious about people's lives until he follows a man named Cobb and befriends him. This I remember being higher on than when I was rewatching it. I think the acting was lacking a little bit and the editing is a bit too chaotic for its own good. Now with context, I think for a first feature, it is very, very impressive, no doubt. I just did not connect with its characters or its story as a whole, and he clearly is experimenting with the twist device that he would later on use much more effectively. Nothing is offensively bad or lazy or anything like that by any means. It just didn't work for me personally, and it's a result of an inexperienced filmmaker, but I liked what he was trying to do, and some of that second act quite a bit. But from this point to number 12 and forward up, it's a bit of a leap in terms of his quality. So with that, number 12 is The Dark Knight Rises. This is the conclusion of his Batman trilogy. I remember loving this as much as Dark Knight when seeing it and being just obsessed with it. I think on release, I saw it maybe 4 or 5 times in theaters. Over the years, I don't dislike it by any means. It's just not as high up as I remember. I think what takes me out a bit is this grounded reality that he's established over the first 2 films has now sort of gone out the window with his new technology, but doesn't have armor that can withstand just a strong Bane's fighting. That sounds nitpicky, and it kind of is, but it always throws me through a loop, and it's hard to overlook it. I think the emotion is, of course, all there, and feels a lot more grand than The Dark Knight, a lot bigger scope, but also does something that comic book movies or superhero movies do, is try to leave things open-ended, even if it wasn't his direct intention. Whether that be Wayne still being alive, even if the ending is very beautiful, or Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character being named Robin at the end as a reveal, and then taking over the Batcave and all that stuff. Not that there's any intention to continue it, it just feels very obnoxious to me personally to throw those things at the end of your movie and not let your conclusion end without having to reveal some sort of possibilities. It's still emotional and has a great bookend to Bale's Batman, but some other characters that come into the mix and thrown in feel too much like they were given too much screen time dedication and draw away from the central story. And it makes it that much more apparent when you feel the runtime. Number 11 is 2002's Insomnia. which is a great thriller that finds Nolan still being grounded and original. It follows an LA detective and his partner assigned to investigate a murder in Alaska, starring Al Pacino and Robin Williams, in a truly unsettling turn for Williams. I think the story loses some steam when we dive into Dormer, Pacino's backstory, and that factors into the plot a lot more. It takes a ton of detours everywhere, but ultimately brings us an eerie and creepy true crime style thriller with an edit that drains you and you just feel the tiredness of this character throughout, given the title's Insomnia. It truly is a feat to both Nolan and editor Dodie Dorn, I think is how you're saying it correctly, do with his actual insomnia that plays into the character and his past and this investigation, and it keeps you on it unease at all times, which is really, really just remarkable. Robin Williams also is, like I said, is just absolutely incredible here, and he would do a role like this with Insomnia or 1 Hour Photo, and there would just be that factor that he would just crawl into your skin and never had a problem coming in and out of that so easily with other movies that he would do, and you just miss out every outside of the box role he took, and I really wish he had gotten to do more before he passed away. Number 10 is Batman Begins, the groundbreaking reboot to the iconic DC character, offering a new, gritty, and incredibly serious take on the character, introducing us to Christian Bale as a titular Bruce Wayne and Batman. Bale offered a suave but conflicted take on Bruce Wayne and Batman, deeply tormented by his parents' murder. Something we have seen interpreted with what feels like dozens of times the origins of Batman and the murder of Bruce Wayne's parents. But here, Nolan takes the time to truly show how that trauma can affect this person and shape who they become, what it takes to move on from this sort of traumatic event, and how he approaches this tiresome story. He doesn't shy away from it. He tries to explore it deeper in the effects of what happens to this character down the road and really treat it like it's the first time you're seeing the story unfold. Even if it does drag out a bit, it works nonetheless because it isn't just a plot device, the murder of his parents, but a motivation for the character and how it's presented. And a huge shout out to Cillian Murphy because his Scarecrow is creepy as ever and gets his Weasleyness down. Murphy just nails that perfectly. While some of it felt a bit stiff, the film overall, obviously due to being something completely new, I think that the heart outweighs that, and Bale is just perfection as this character, like I said. It feels like someone he was born to play, and it was just a perfect timing for him. Number 9 is a bit of a controversial one as far as its placement goes. It is Memento. Memento is a film that I will defend for its innovation and Nolan's biggest staple for his style of creating a nonlinear story and interweaving multiple timelines and creating this rug that he then pulls out from underneath you. For me, it just isn't as hard hitting as some of his other films. I fully respect and love that people would rank it higher, just not me personally. Guy Pearce, it really is truly terrific here as a man that has no memory of what happened to him, very short term memory loss, tries to puzzle his life together by the tattoos he leaves on his body. There is a frantic and vulnerable energy to him that isn't always present in the way that Nolan writes his protagonists. I don't want to say many more specifics because it does kind of ruin some revelations, what comes from scene to scene, and it's hard to talk about plot or story without spoiling it to some degree. Nolan's filmography is so special that something this low on his ranking being this special of a film is a feat in and of itself. If you want a grounded and psychological thriller, this is one I definitely recommend, and I may revisit and talk about more on a higher perception and higher ranking some other day, but for me right now, it is number 9. Number 8 is a bit controversial as well as far as how people do their rankings, and I've seen a lot of people rank this higher. It is Inception. Inception was a big test for Nolan, as it was a giant scale original film, arguably adapted, but to general audiences, something built in without established IP, and did it work so well. The mechanics, much more than something like Tenet or Interstellar to an extent, are much easier to grasp. These feel like some of the biggest set pieces Nolan has directed while also maintaining that continuity throughout the story. Some of my negative aspects do involve the script, where I feel like there's a lot of dialogue that focuses on explanation and less character work. and a lot of exposition, and the mechanics of the storytelling and the device of the dream sequences feel easy to grasp because in the script there is just so much dialogue about how it works and a lot of explaining. While this type of story needs you to understand what's going on, keeping the story going and less pausing for, again, explanation works so well for something like Tenet, where you don't understand 100% the mechanics, but can enjoy the story more if you aren't stopping to try and think about it as much. I do feel upon rewatch that the emotion and heart of the story between Cobb and his wife worked less for me. The story with Fisher and his father feel a lot more like the center of it and a lot more tangible and deeper for this film. Nothing there is a negative, but at this point in this high up in Nolan's filmography and rankings, these become kind of nitpicks. Again, Inception is great, but it didn't work for me as well on rewatch. Number 7 is one to this day I have now seen, I think, 4 times that I love, and I still have a hard time grasping how, like I said with Inception, the mechanics of this world work, and that is Tenet. A lot of people dislike it for this reason, and honestly, I can't fully blame them. There is a line in this when our main character is being explained inverted objects, and the other character says to him, "Don't try to understand it, just feel it." And that really captures what Nolan is wanting us to do. No doubt, this concept still messes with your head, even me to this day, and is very hard to grasp overall and really get a handle on it. But for me, this really works as a heist espionage film that feels as close to a Nolan Bond that we may ever get. The sequences with the inversion, as they call it, are just jaw dropping, and you can't believe he was able to do any of this. It's not like Inception or Interstellar, where understandably, those you do need CGI, you do need a blend of practical and CGI to do it. And of course, Tenet did have a lot of CGI that I'm sure we didn't notice. But these sequences were filmed and edited in a certain way that you really just felt like this was happening in front of you. Even on several rewatches, I can't quite understand so much of it, but this is a rare exception where it doesn't quite bother me. If you've not seen Tenet in a while, or not at all, go in with an open mind and let yourself feel it, because this really is just a truly special and original film. Number 6 is also a bit controversial because I know it's many people's favorite movie of all time and much higher in his rankings. But for me, number 6 is Interstellar, and that is one film that is right up my alley. Whether talking about space travel or life on other worlds, I remember being slightly frustrated at first seeing it because there was a lack of the latter. That doesn't hold as much frustration with me now because at its heart and core, it's about a father reconciling with his mistake of abandoning his daughter and finding a path for himself and creating life for her that he feels he otherwise could not have given it if he stayed. In that regard, it's a beautiful story and one that hits a lot of emotion, and some scenes are the best of any of Nolan's career. The visuals are stunning, some of the best he's ever done, and best space sequences that he's ever put on film from anyone. I think it's a bit lower on my list, especially compared to others, but when it comes to Nolan, it is hard to have a ranking that doesn't change often because so many of his could be number 1, and you would completely understand it. I hope Nolan decides to venture into space travel or something with that kind of science fiction again, because he has such a great grasp at making you feel this wonder in this sort of vast universe. Number 5 is The Prestige, and it is at number 5 because something about this story on every rewatch just feels so fresh and original that whether or not you know the twist or anything about it, it continues to surprise me every time I've seen it, because as I get sucked into this story, I forget about everything I know and find new things to dissect. Not many films can do magic in movies like this one does, but this one is 1, grounded, and 2, something not super silly. This manages to avoid any tropes of a period drama and wraps you into the story first, rather than limit itself to the constraints of a film taking place, however long ago. This contains easily also one of Bale's most underappreciated roles, one that isn't flashy, but manages to strike several different traits that are both calculated as a person and incredibly vulnerable. The magic at play also is so well done because it is simple in its presentation, yet so dynamic. You don't feel like he is making entire cities disappear or someone traveling from one side of the world to the other. It keeps it grounded and doesn't make it feel silly. They are simple tricks that escalate into more complex and unbelievable, but they never feel bombastic. The story at heart, too, is really another underappreciated aspect and something that he can really nail whenever he does. The duality of man. One with ravenous ambition for success and power, while the other is simply doing something he loves and losing the things he loves because of it. Of course, more than complex than that, but at face value is how I interpret it. It makes for an incredibly satisfying ending that is probably one of the better ones in Nolan's filmography. Number 4, and now we are here with his newest release, The Odyssey. I went in with a completely fresh slate, took out all the hype around the picture. Admittedly, I have some tiny issues, but they are not whatsoever detrimental for me in the grand scope of it. This is a huge film, literally and thematically. It honestly could go higher for me, but I want to see it again at least twice before making such a determination. I got the chance to see it in a Dolby Theater at AMC soon in 2 days. I'll be seeing it in IMAX 70mm, so I am incredibly excited for that. Also, to be transparent, I might have read The Odyssey back in school, but I really don't remember. I have some familiarity with the story and its influence, but I'm not one of these people that claim that they have the deepest literary background of this story. I just wasn't a great high school student, to be honest, when it was prominent in education. So, as a story, without any preconceived notions of the original text, this is just remarkable. Matt Damon gives what is maybe his best performance of his entire career, and right now, I really hope he does get that Oscar. What he pulls off, giving a character that is vulnerable, stubborn, arrogant, and filled with sorrow and regret for his own actions, is something hugely cinematic, but he grounds this mythical character, and you feel for him at every point in the story. I'm someone that's fascinated with depictions of Greek or Norse mythology, and I'm so glad that Nolan did not go so over the top with showing Zeus as a 100-foot being shooting lightning bolts or a 200-foot kraken monster coming up from under the ocean. You see these characters in this story be attacked by things that are fictional and mythological to us, and that's how they interact with these things as well. Nothing ever feels, even to them, like it's tangible or like that they see physically these gods in play. They're all sort of myths to them as well, but they feel a lot more close to Earth than they would for someone like us. But the standout for me personally, scene-wise, is the tale of the sirens and how Nolan depicts it. My heart was just in my stomach watching this unfold. Not for what it shows, but for what it means for Odysseus and the journey he's on. Much like Dunkirk, this has a score from Ludwig Göransson that is just absolutely electric. That one was Hans Zimmer's, this one is Göransson. There is always what feels like an escalation of tension that most scores or films would have the score rise for a few seconds and then have a bombastic, drum or percussion or something. Göransson and Nolan craft these moments that can last for 4 to 5 minutes at a time that just raise the stakes and leave you short of breath trying to catch up and keep up to pace. Not to leave out the score for the siren scene is some of the most beautiful and haunting moments listening to a film in some time. I just couldn't believe what I was watching, and I want to watch it 2 or 3 more times in that moment just to feel fresh again. As I say all this, I'm almost talking myself into it being my top 2 or 3 films of his, even higher than it is now at 4. But I believe recency bias of myself and others, so I'm going to see it a couple more times before I can make that determination. So I will give this several more objective viewings to fully grasp, but the true hype you have heard is so well warranted. It's not easy to see an IMAX 70mm the quote-unquote true way that many people have said, and even the marketing has told you. If you can see it in a larger format, that's perfect, but the experience is nonetheless special in any type of theater as long as you see it in a theater that is the best way to watch this film. Number 3 is The Dark Knight, probably the film in his entire catalog that is his most influential. After this, comic book and superhero stories changed forever. Some for the better and a lot for the worse, but that's a topic for another day. The Dark Knight is a towering achievement. One of his biggest influences that he stated is Heat, which you can really feel in this, and it helps that I love this so high because Heat is one of my favorite movies of all time. He takes much of what he loves about that genre, specifically in the gritty, large-scale heist elements of Heat, and applies them to this comic book story. What's so brilliant is the societal themes of disrupting order and corruption, but at what cost? The Dark Knight always holds a special place in my heart for all these scenes filmed in Chicago. It's always a treat when I can be in the city and remember all these places that were filmed there and what scene they took place in. For better or worse, like I said, The Dark Knight changed superhero or comic book stories forever, many of whom have tried to shape their own stories around darker themes or even try to ground their stories, much of what Nolan did with his Batman trilogy. Also, it should go without saying, but anytime you talk about this movie, you can't not mention Heath Ledger's Joker, which raised the standard for villains in these types of movies forever. When it's talked about so much to no end, in this case, it's for a reason. It really is probably the best villain performance of any film to ever exist. Number 2 is Dunkirk. Dunkirk is one that I'm so glad I revisited before creating this list. What a special and remarkable achievement it is. This feels like the best parts of every war film you love and just wrapped up into one. I don't have any negative notes about it. The direction of practical aerial gunfights or the tension built up of men standing on a beach, combined with Hans Zimmer's nail-biting escalating score on every scene, is something so unique to his own musical catalog that I can't speak highly of it enough, being one of my favorite scores I've heard in the last decade. While there isn't a main character in the traditional sense, every story or POV you follow gets its own emotional payoff. Some have character work that you cling on to personally, while others are representations of men who fight in these wars, and that kind of ties into Nolan's overall theme of this movie. The biggest standout for me is Mark Rylance, Barry Keoghan, and Tom Glenn-Carney is with Cillian Murphy, as the story that they're in follows a few citizens on their boat heading to Dunkirk to rescue men who are on the verge of being blown away. That whole side plot, that whole side story was just absolutely beautiful. And much like Memento, the Odyssey, and the following, this has a nonlinear structure that builds up and comes to a head or collides with another. It took me a couple cuts to grasp onto of what was going on because they're so out of sync as far as time goes as well. But it works so beautifully once it coalesces together. A masterpiece with a capital M, and I know it's not high on everyone's list, but I will stand by this film to the day I die. And now, if you haven't guessed it, my number 1 is indeed Oppenheimer. With much consideration and thought, Oppenheimer is a movie that the word achievement I've used so much because many of the films that Nolan attempts to do are not traditional big budget blockbusters, at least that are output. You don't see many original space travel emotional dramas, war films that don't have an A-plus star headliner that doesn't contain a linear narrative, a grounded superhero trilogy with minimal CGI of the most arguably famous comic book character ever, or an espionage film that deals with time travel or inverted objects. Oppenheimer, on paper, is probably the more straightforward drama to date he's done, but nothing about how he directs or shoots it is traditional. Not to mention, in any other director's hands, a story like this would be a lot quieter, slower paced, probably much shorter. But what Nolan does is makes the actions that Oppenheimer goes through feel grand in terms of the world and in how we're viewing it. We follow Cillian Murphy and his life on the road to creating the atomic bomb as Robert J. Oppenheimer. That sounds like something that is the first third of a war film that turns into an ordinary war film, but in this, it's solely about Oppenheimer's life and how his morality conflicts with his duty and the choice whether or not to, what he has created the world we see today, from Nolan's point of view at least. It's a cautionary tale in the most original and obvious way, asking what we create for the sake of advancing humans is actually what's going to destroy us. For a 3-hour period piece drama, with one standout set piece, of course, and part courtroom drama, this feels like the biggest film in its human scope that Nolan has made. Cillian Murphy won the Oscar for a reason. It's one of the most deserving wins of the century, and hands down his best performance. I don't think the Odyssey happens without Oppenheimer, and Oppenheimer feels like as if it's the film that has defined and cemented Nolan's career for the rest of it. If you have somehow not watched it by this point, I really, really urge you to seek it out. I believe it's on Peacock right now. It's one that I don't think anyone has ever been disappointed by once they've watched it. There we have it, my definitive ranking of all 13 feature films from the one and only Christopher Nolan, the defining director of our generation today. Whether you agree with that or not, objectively, he just is. He's not everyone's number 1 personally, but the filmmaker that defined the landscape of film that is currently at the height of his powers. And thank you so much for tuning in today. It was so much fun to do this and a lot of back and forth for me personally. I hope to be back on track soon with episodes. I want to crank out a lot more recommendations for everyone. Festival season is coming up, my favorite time of the film calendar year, and I'm going to preview a lot of them for you in a soon episode. If you haven't already, please like and comment on YouTube, review on Apple and Spotify, subscribe on all the platforms. It truly helps the show out a lot, and I am eternally grateful if you do. And until next time, watch more movies.